At some point in almost every culture, there is a quiet story told by a child that adults struggle to explain. A child wakes up in the morning and casually describes floating above their bed, drifting through the hallway, or visiting a place that felt more real than a dream. The adults listening usually smile politely, dismissing it as imagination, a vivid dream, or the wild creativity of a young mind. But if you step back and look closely at how the human mind develops, how perception changes with age, and how the brain learns to filter reality, a fascinating pattern begins to appear. Children seem to slip into altered states of awareness far more easily than adults, and if astral projection, the experience of consciousness separating from the physical body, exists anywhere along the spectrum between dreaming, dissociation, and deep meditative states, then children may naturally stand much closer to that doorway than grown adults ever do. The reason begins with something surprisingly simple: children have not yet built the mental walls that adults rely on to navigate everyday life. From the moment we are born, the brain is absorbing an overwhelming flood of sensory information, and during childhood it operates in a much more open and fluid mode. Neurologically, young children spend a large portion of their waking and sleeping lives in slower brainwave patterns, particularly theta waves, the same brainwave state associated with deep meditation, hypnosis, and the borderland between sleep and wakefulness. In this state, imagination and perception blur together, the boundaries of self feel flexible, and the mind is highly receptive to internal imagery and altered experiences. Adults, on the other hand, spend most of their day in faster beta brainwaves, the mental state associated with analysis, logic, planning, and survival-focused thinking. Over time, this shift creates a very different internal environment. The adult brain becomes highly structured, highly skeptical, and highly protective of what it considers reality. It filters out experiences that don't fit established patterns, quickly labeling them as imagination, dreams, or errors in perception. Children haven't learned this filtering process yet. Their minds operate with far fewer restrictions, and that openness creates conditions where experiences that feel like astral projection can occur more naturally. But brainwaves alone are only part of the story. Another crucial factor lies in how children relate to fear and control. Adults spend most of their lives maintaining control over their schedules, their responsibilities, their reputation, their physical safety. This constant need for control creates tension in the nervous system. Even when adults try to relax, there is often a subtle background resistance, a voice in the mind monitoring everything. Am I doing this right? Is something going wrong? What if I lose control? That internal tension becomes a barrier to entering deeply relaxed states. Astral projection, if it occurs, requires the opposite condition: a surrender of control, a willingness to let consciousness drift without forcing it. Children live much closer to that surrender naturally. Their daily lives are filled with play, curiosity, and exploration rather than constant self-monitoring. When a child lies down to sleep, they often slip quickly into vivid dream states because their minds are not cluttered with endless analysis and responsibility. Their imagination flows freely, and their sense of identity is still forming, which means the boundary between self and experience is much more flexible. Psychologists have long observed that children often engage in what's called immersive imagination, where the mind becomes so absorbed in a scenario that it feels almost physically real. A cardboard box becomes a spaceship. The floor becomes lava. An imaginary friend feels present enough to hold conversations with. To an adult observer this looks like simple play, but neurologically it reveals something deeper. The child's brain is capable of generating extremely vivid internal worlds that the body responds to as if they are real. This same mechanism appears in many reports of astral projection. The environment feels tangible, movement feels natural, and the experience carries a strange clarity that sits somewhere between dreaming and waking awareness. As children grow older, something begins to change. Education, social expectations, and repeated corrections slowly reshape how the mind interprets experience. A child who describes floating above their bed might hear, "That was just a dream." A child who says they saw something unusual may be told, "You're imagining things." Over time, these responses teach the brain to suppress certain types of perception. The mind begins filtering out experiences that don't match the accepted model of reality. It's not that the underlying ability disappears completely, it's that the brain becomes extremely good at shutting the door before the experience can fully form. There's also a physiological layer to consider. Children sleep differently than adults. Their sleep cycles contain longer and deeper periods of REM sleep, the stage associated with vivid dreaming and heightened brain activity. REM sleep is also when the body enters a state of temporary paralysis, preventing physical movement while dreams occur. Many adults who report spontaneous astral projection describe it beginning during sleep paralysis, when the mind wakes up while the body remains immobile. For a child whose sleep patterns naturally hover closer to these states, slipping into a hybrid experience between dreaming and waking awareness may be much more common. Another overlooked factor is belief itself. Adults carry heavy frameworks of belief about what is possible and what is not. These beliefs act like invisible rules that shape perception. If an adult strongly believes astral projection is impossible, the brain often blocks any experience that resembles it, quickly categorizing it as a dream or hallucination. Children don't yet carry such rigid belief systems. Their worldview is still expanding, and they are far more willing to accept unusual experiences without immediately rejecting them. In psychological terms, expectation heavily influences perception. When the mind expects something to be impossible, it tends to close off pathways that might lead there. When the mind remains open, perception becomes far more flexible. This is why many adults who successfully practice astral projection techniques spend months or even years learning to undo the mental tension and disbelief they've accumulated over a lifetime. They practice meditation, relaxation, and visualization not just as techniques, but as ways to return the brain to a state that resembles the openness of childhood. Yet the story doesn't end with childhood advantage. There's a fascinating twist hidden in this dynamic. While children may enter these states more easily, they often lack the awareness to control or understand them. Experiences come and go without structure, sometimes remembered vividly, sometimes forgotten by morning. Adults, once they learn to quiet the analytical mind and relax deeply, may actually gain something children don't have: deliberate awareness. They can observe the experience, question it, analyze it, and explore it with intention. In other words, children may naturally reach the doorway, but adults who train their minds may learn how to walk through it consciously. And this is where the topic shifts from mystery to something more practical. If the differences between children and adults are rooted in brainwave states, belief systems, and mental tension, then the ability to access altered states of awareness may not be lost with age, it may simply be buried under layers of habit. The adult mind becomes like a fortress designed to protect stability and predictability. That fortress is incredibly useful for navigating the real world, but it also blocks experiences that exist outside ordinary perception. Children live outside that fortress. Their minds are still open fields rather than guarded cities. And occasionally, in the quiet space between waking and dreaming, those open fields allow consciousness to wander in ways adults have forgotten how to do. So when a child casually describes floating through the house or flying through the sky before waking up in their bed, the story might not be as simple as adults assume. It might be a glimpse into how flexible human awareness can be before years of conditioning reshape it. Whether those experiences are truly astral projection, highly vivid dreams, or something that science has not fully explained yet remains an open question. But the pattern itself is undeniable. Children approach the edges of consciousness with a natural ease that adults spend years trying to rediscover. And perhaps the real lesson hidden in all of this is not about proving astral projection exists, but about remembering something we once knew intuitively, that the human mind, especially in its earliest years, is capable of exploring reality in ways far more fluid, mysterious, and expansive than we usually allow ourselves to believe.